We do have an update on the investigation into July's deadly explosion at a manufacturing building in Fremont. Back on July 29th, 32-year-old Dylan Danielson and his two young daughters, Thea and Haven, were killed in that massive blast at Horizon Biofuels. Well, today, the U.S. Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board says their preliminary investigation points to a combustible wood dust explosion, which it calls a well-known and avoidable hazard. The report says Danielson's two daughters were waiting for their father in a break room while he worked in a different part of the facility. The safety board says the facility might still be structurally compromised, which has prevented their investigators from getting close to the building. The chairman of the CSB said the terrible tragedy shouldn't have happened. A man is in custody this afternoon.